Welcome to the Gateway Mission Podcast. My name is Steve Rusticus. I'm the Chief Operations Officer at Gateway Mission. We're glad that you're taking the time to listen to this podcast. During our time together, we want to talk about what we do, how we do it, and what we hope you understand is why we do it. In this episode, we're going to start a series called Homelessness 101. And I'm joined today by Scott Klingberg. Scott is the campus director of the Gateway Women's Center. And Scott has about 15 years experience in homeless ministry. And a cool thing is Scott just finished a dissertation and a doctorate that focused around homelessness. So he's really our resident expert on some of this stuff. So we want to have a little bit of a conversation today. Glad to have you here, Scott.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Steve.
Hey, let's start out with a really broad question. What defines homelessness?
Sure. I mean, obviously, being homeless is a place without a place to live. But HUD defines it. That's the Housing Urban Development defines it in kind of in three categories. One, chronic homelessness. Those are people who have been homeless for more than a year or over a period of years, just frequent homelessness. And then there's what's called episodic homelessness, which is those people that are in and out of homelessness, maybe living with friends or in and out of a shelter. And then there's those really what we call transitional homelessness, typical kind of things like lost their housing for a short period of time, maybe a fire or some other tragedy that would bring them to be homeless for a short period of time.
Now, when we have men, women, and children that come to our men's center and our women's center, what kind of categories do they tend to fall into, Scott?
Mostly in the chronic homelessness and that episodic homelessness. I mean, we get very few of those who are just an emergency need. And, as we think about homelessness and many of us would not be homeless if we lost everything tonight because we have relationships and friends. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But it's typically those chronic homelessness and those people who are more frequently homeless that come and stay with us.
So it seems as if the issue of homelessness has been sort of amped up lately. We hear more and more about it. How's it changed? And maybe you can talk about sort of the magnitude of the issue and the problem and
Sure.
how the government at least has tried to solve some of those things.
Sure. Yeah. Well, we've been working hard in the government side. That's for sure over the last years. Just this last year in 2020, the federal government has spent $6.6 billion trying to solve the homelessness problem. But yet it's gone up by 3% last year. So it is an ongoing problem that just continues to rise. And we see that all around, even in our area.
Yeah. So is it fair to say, Scott, that just more money thrown at the problem hasn't kind of impacted the problem?
Yeah, exactly. If you look at the statistics say that there's been a 200% increase in funding from the government over the last 10 years, but yet homelessness has increased by 20%. So what we're doing does not seem to be working.
Okay, so let's talk about it. That's the broad picture of what's homelessness and what does it look like nationally. How about locally? What, in our area, Ottawa and Allegan County, which we serve the homeless in, what does that look like here?
So we do see homelessness increased here over the years. If you look at the last decade, it's gone up. In the last year, though, or 2 years with COVID, there was a significant decrease in homelessness, at least reported. In 2020, the numbers were down by about 20%, and that was across the board for shelters. But part of that was due to the de-intensification of shelters during the COVID crisis, and then the amazing work of some of our partners, particularly in our community, Good Samaritan Ministries, who have, they typically helped about 20 households a year to maintain their housing so they didn't get evicted. Last year in 2021, they helped over 1,200 families in our community stay in their housing, which may have ended up homeless at some point. So Other than the last year, it has been increasing, but we do see that additional help that was helped due to COVID.
So let's talk about one of the areas we have seen an increase in our area is the unsheltered homeless. That's a phrase that we frequently use. Can you talk about that and how that's changed over the last few years?
Sure. The unsheltered homeless would be those people who are living without a shelter. So they're living typically outside in a tent or perhaps in a car. Some you may have seen in some of the parking lots around town where somebody lives in a car. That has increased significantly. In our county, 2016, we recorded 4 people living that way. This last year, it's estimated to be somewhere around 70. That's a huge increase that has caused significant concern in our community.
Do you have a sense, Scott, about kind of what's contributed to that unsheltered homelessness?
Sure. Well, the addictions and mental health issues, those are the primary drivers to those people living outside that really struggle with those things. There's really deeper issues going on there.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of the nature of our homeless friends and homeless guests. Is there one thing that you go, hey, there's something true that seems to be true about all of them, or at least most of them?
Yeah, that's an important point to say. It's not all of them, but most of them. Most people that come to us that we see coming into our shelters are really, the term I use is relationlessness, which is not really a word. It's kind of a big mouthful. But, it's not having relationships with people, or very few relationships, or relationships that are helpful. And we see that over and over. They come in, they've kind of burned their bridges, or from either things that they've done or things that have been done to them, or the difficulties that they have in life. And they really struggle being on their own, and they have no support group that they can fall back on in these times of crisis.
So I know it's always difficult to say, hey, a group of people, categorizing them and giving them certain traits. But can you talk a little bit about what we see amongst many of the homeless that come in? What are some of those typical characteristics that we see?
Well, with those, in my research I did, one of the interesting things I came across was that it's estimated that 30 to 50% of the homeless adults had spent time in foster care. Now, if you connect that to relationships, when you look at in Michigan, the average age to go into foster care is 6 years old, and then you make that connection to relational difficulties later in life, that kind of makes sense there. But certainly addictions is a significant issue. It's about 40% of the population suffer from addictions and work or deal with addictions in their life. But generally, the homeless population is getting older. They're going to, there's a much more homeless now above age 50, which we see in our shelters. We're having to make adjustments for that with additional medical support and things like that. But also, they're likely to die prematurely, again, because of the stress of being homeless and the medical challenges that they face. So it's really a significant difficulties that they have.
Yeah. So what was the percentage you said about addictions? And
it's about 40% is estimated. Obviously, that number changes, fluctuates, but about 40%. And then you connect that with significant mental health issues, which is about 35% estimated, and that's serious mental health issues.
Yeah, so. I mean, we hear a lot, especially during COVID and now in the aftermath as we kind of process our way out of it, about mental and behavioral health issues. Talk a little bit more about that, would you, as it pertains to the homeless population?
Yeah, so the homeless population really struggle with those. We're going to go back to, like I said, it's things that mental health issues that have come from either things that have been done to them or things that have happened to them in their lives. And they really, they carry those things through. And so they continue to struggle with that. And when you look at this high percentage of those people that have those mental health issues, but then those serious mental health issues where they really cannot function in our society to maintain employment and to have relationships with other people, that number is quite high too as well that we see.
Yeah, I was going to say, not to put you on the spot too much, but I mean, your day-to-day, your team's day-to-day in that kind of stuff, what would you say just from a rough percentage of people that come into the Gateway Women and Children's Center are experiencing those kinds of behavioral mental health issues?
Yeah, it's about 35% for us. That we've been tracking with those, what we call serious mental health issues, which are issues that impact their abilities to have a normal life.
Right, which would include, obviously, housing, living on their own, employment, all of those sorts of things. So that's been a huge factor in the increase in some homelessness and things that are happening. It's interesting. I think that a lot of people, when they get a picture of a homeless person, has a picture of a Skid Row bum, I mean, the kind of Hollywood portrayal of someone who's, not well kept, drinks a lot, lives in a stoop in a building or something like that. And that's certainly, some of that's true. Just like anything else, it's an exaggeration, I think, of the reality. But one of the things that's true is increasingly women and children are finding themselves homeless, and that's specifically the group that you work with. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how that impacts women and children?
Sure. Yeah, it's estimated that about a third of the homeless population in our country are women and children, which is really a significant issue if you think about it. We regularly see women come to our door that have no place to go and that have children with them, or we have women and children that were living in a car or outside. It is a significant part of the population. You're right. Probably the traditional picture we think of a homeless person is that kind of Skid Row type person living out in the park or wherever. But seeing those children come in is really a thing that our heart goes out for to help.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we've talked about this, about people. Can you just tell me something? We had a woman come in and was a part of it had 6 or 7 children. So what does that look like a bit for her?
So, I mean, you think about how are you going to overcome your homelessness if you have 1 child, 2 child, you look at 7 children, that's really difficult to overcome the challenges than to just do anything in life, carrying 7 children around by yourself. So, many of these, the ladies that come to us too have suffered from domestic violence. That number is very high above with those, the women who are homeless. It's estimated about 70% or more have experienced some kind of an abuse relationship, which really connects to why they end up being with us.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit as we kind of wind things down here. And what are some of the sort of common approaches to deal with homelessness? I mean, you've been in this for a long time. You've seen it. What do we do? What actions do we take? What actions do others take as they try to walk with people and help them move out of homelessness?
So obviously, I mean, the things that we think of, and you've probably seen, I've seen over the years, is you see a homeless feeding ministry outside. They're caring for providing food or blankets or whatever is needed for those people living outside. And then there's different programs that are out there currently. The Housing First approach was to get them into housing, which is a great idea, and the low barrier shelters to get people to come in off the streets. And those are all great things into providing those things that are out there. But there's some sense of that there's deeper needs there than just providing a place to live. There's we talked briefly about the relational, and as we'll talk more about those things, but just those deeper needs there that aren't really addressed with those basic needs.
Right. So you're giving somebody a place to live. You're giving them clothing. You're giving them food. You're providing a place for them to feel safe and secure. And yet we still see this increase in unsheltered homelessness. So, I think it's an important thing for us to spend some time talking about. And I think it's a good place for us to sort of end this first episode, because that's where we're going to go next. We're going to talk a little bit about what are some of those deeper issues. And we're going to take a look at, why for us at Gateway, we say that we want to address those deeper issues that people have, because we want to see long-term change and transformation in people's lives. So we're glad you listened. If you want to know more about Gateway Mission, you can find us at hopefoundhere.org. And thanks again for listening. Until next time.